You're listening to another great podcast in the MyMac Podcasting Network.
News, views, security stories, technology, and all sorts of other related chit-chat that catches our attention. Welcome to the Essential Apple Podcast.
Hello, and welcome to Essential Apple Podcast 146. Obviously, the Apple event is on Tuesday, so all of the news, quote unquote, blogs are full of nothing but speculation about what's coming, or people trying to tell us that they know what's coming. Well, we're not interested in any of that. We're really not. We'll wait until Tuesday and see what Uncle Tim and co have to tell us. So, nobody but me was available to come on the show today. They're all off trying to do the last weekend of summer thing. But I am joined by Mike Bombich of Carbon Copy Cloner fame. Hello, Mike.
Hey, how's it going?
Well, apart from the fact that I have a streaming nose for some reason, I've either got some sort of cold or a sinus infection. I'm going to stuff Kleenex up my nostrils and carry on regardless, Mike.
That'll do it.
Yeah. Well, I hope you're good. Obviously, we know I've been on the Catalina beta, and I've spoken to you actually, a few weeks ago, didn't I, about the whole disc thing. So, we've had a bit of a chat about it previously, but I thought it'd be really great if you could talk to us and explain to the listeners, particularly, some of the kind of magic that Apple have done with the APFS, and also, how that's likely to affect users, which I think is probably not very much unless you care about how these things work. But also, how it's affected CCC and what sort of shenanigans you've had to do behind the scenes to, keep us all safe in our cloned protective backups.
Yeah, sure. Probably the biggest thing that they've introduced in Catalina is the concept of a volume group. And a volume group is where, first of all, we've got this concept of a volume container with APFS. And within a container, you can create however many volumes you want to, and they all share the space of the whole disk. So that was a really great thing for partitioning, because in the past, when you partitioned a disk, you had to dedicate a certain amount of space to each volume. But now you can have multiple volumes in the container, and they all share the space. So in Catalina, Apple introduced a volume group within the container, and that's not an actual structure. That's just a concept that says these two volumes work together as a single entity. And you can see both of the volumes if you look at them in Disk Utility, but in the Finder, you see just one volume. And the way that Apple leveraged this in Catalina is they're creating a read-only system volume where it has just about 10 gigabytes of system content, and you can't make changes to that volume. And then all of the other stuff, and then bits and pieces of the system that have to be writable, are kept on a data volume. And the way that this works is when you apply the upgrade, the installer takes your current system volume and converts it to basically just tags it as a data volume. And they remove some of the system components from it. And then they create this secondary system volume, and then the installer will install the system components onto the system volume. And then it just groups these two together. So when you start up the system, both of these volumes get mounted at the same time, and they're presented to you as a single volume. And that's the piece of magic that a lot of people are kind of wondering about. Like, how is it that we've got these two different volumes, but they appear as one volume? Like, when you're looking at the system volume in the Finder, you can navigate directly from it into your users folder, for example. So you can't see where you're going from one volume to the other in the Finder. And the way that works is with a concept called a firm link. And there's about 20 of these on the system. And basically, there's a folder on the system volume that links automatically to a corresponding folder on the data volume, seamlessly and in the background. You can't see that these are links. There's no special icon for these folders. The file system just automatically jumps from one volume to the other when you're navigating through these in the Finder. And Apple calls these a bi-directional wormhole between two file systems, because not only can you go down say you started the system volume, you can go into the users folder and into the data volume, but then you can also get back up to it seamlessly back to the system volume, which is probably a real technical detail that most people won't notice, but it's just part of what makes it a very seamless transfer from one volume to the other. And like I said, the two volumes actually appear in disk utility, but only one of them is presented in the Finder. And that's actually just because the data volume is tagged as a hidden volume. But they're both there, and you can find them if you wanted to.
So, when I first came across this, Mike, when I first installed the Catalina beta, I'm not super technical when it comes to, file structures and so on, although I understand the basic concepts behind them. My immediate thought was that it was a kind of, a bit like when you used to do a soft RAID. Mm-hmm. Is it something? But obviously, I know a RAID you would either mirror it or stripe it, so it's not exactly like that. But the way that you have two volumes which kind of appear in the Finder as if they're one entity, is that kind of part of how it works, or is that a reasonable analogy?
It's a good analogy, but technically it doesn't work like that at all.
No, that's what I thought. Yeah, they don't actually work like that, but
right. And actually, Fusion is kind of a similar step where you have two physical devices and you're putting a single volume on top of that. This is just a little bit different because it can sit on top of all that hardware and even sit on top of a Fusion volume. But it's more like if you have like a symbolic link and it's sitting on your hard disk, and when you click on it, it actually takes you to a folder on an external hard disk. Like if you kept your music library on an external disk. As you go through that symbolic link, you pass directly into the external volume without any special UI. It looks like magic.
Yeah.
And that's all these firm links. That's what they do.
Yeah, because from what I've read, Apple have called them firm links rather than, hard links or symbolic links. Is that because they kind of work in both directions?
Yes, it's kind of in between a soft link and a hard link. It's kind of funny, their choice of words there.
Well, I guess they've just, leveraged the kind of, that's hardware and that's software. Well, in between you have firmware. Well, in between hard links and soft links, you have firm links.
Yes.
I suppose it's better than calling them semi-rigid links or something.
Yes.
So, obviously, the other thing that I've read about this and I've found is that obviously this whole kind of volume group, volume container, as you said, you mentioned partitioning. As I understand it, is that works a bit more like if you have a virtual machine, you can create when you create a virtual hard drive for that machine, you can create hard drives which you can specify what the size of the hard drive is likely to be, but it only takes up the space that it's actually using. So, in a virtual machine, you can say, I want to give that a, 500 gig hard drive. But if you've only got 100 gig of data in there, it only actually uses 100 gig of hard disk space, even though it shows up to the virtual machine as a much bigger drive.
Yes, precisely. That's actually a really good analogy.
So that's kind of how this whole volume group works, yeah? That it's kind of like a dynamic disk size, no matter what it reports to the hardware. So that I'm guessing here, but as I understand it, that's kind of how you can have that drive and you can stick another partition in, and it doesn't affect any existing partitions, because what you're doing is saying, okay, in that empty space, whether it claims to be used by another partition or not, you can stick another. So the partitions are kind of dynamic, as it were, as I understand it.
Yeah, precisely.
Yeah, so they work a bit like what those disk images you can make, the ones that stretch as you stuff more things into them.
Right, like sparse images.
Yes, sparse disk images, that's the one. Yeah. Okay, so in a way, what you're saying is each partition in a group is in a way like a sparse bundle. It just magically can expand as you stuff things into it.
Yeah, each volume within it, yes.
Yeah, excellent. Because the other thing is, which maybe the listeners don't, although this is about APFS, in this version that they're shipping with Catalina, they've kind of turned on a load of things that APFS can do, which they didn't activate when they first released APFS. Am I correct in that? Is that?
I don't think so. What are you thinking of?
Well, I'm thinking about this thing like they're actually making use of the volume grouping and was that?
Well, the space sharing is not new, and that's something that they've been taking advantage of pretty much ever since High Sierra shipped.
Right.
But the volume group concept is brand new.
Okay.
And the volume group doesn't affect space sharing at all. It's really just a concept that says that the volumes within this group behave like one volume, and only one volume will be presented in the Finder when this volume group is present.
Okay, so that part is new then.
Yes.
Okay.
That's the only new concept that I think that they've introduced in Catalina. Now in macOS Mojave, they introduced a defragmentation feature very quietly, but it was disabled by default, and that's still disabled by default on Catalina. So I don't know if that's... honestly, I'm not sure what Apple's intention is with that feature. It's very lightly documented, disabled by default, and doesn't seem to do very much. It may defragment file data, but I did some testing, and I'm actually going to post a blog article next week. I think this defragmentation feature may be intended to improve performance of APFS on rotational disks, but I don't know. I'm getting the feeling that rotational disks are going the way of the floppy disk.
I think I'm with you on that. I mean, the thing with rotational drives is on my last laptop, which was 2012 MacBook Pro, so it was the last of the DVD drive models, and I upgraded that by taking out the DVD drive and putting in an SSD, which allowed me to have to put all my system and stuff onto the SSD, but keep my large rotational drive for storage. But when I moved up to the one I've got now, the Retina MacBook Pro, with an SSD, at first I thought I was really going to miss that much space, but actually, as time has moved on, we keep more stuff in the cloud, more stuff, particularly photographs with HEIC. Is that the one? Are much compressed better. I think that rotational drives, at least for probably most consumers, are likely to be going the way of the Dodo, except maybe for people like photographers or videographers who want a lot of large amounts of storage. But that's I can see that being more kind of network storage, something that most people probably wouldn't bother with.
Well, network storage is horrible, but I think there's always going to be the person that needs the 8 terabyte hard drive or the 10 terabyte hard drive. But as far as the system disk is concerned, I think people are going to find that rotational disks just don't work well for a system disk. And really that's because Apple made a choice in how they implemented APFS. On HFS, all of the file system metadata is clumped together in one section of...
Oh, damn.
Hello?
Sorry, Mike. I literally lost all my internet. It just went completely. Everything just went out. Totally. Right. We're back. Sorry. So, where were we? You were talking about on HFS how all the data was, all the metadata was clumped together in one space.
Right. So with HFS, when you format that volume, disk utility the file system will set aside some space just for file system metadata, which is like the folder hierarchy, the file names, file attributes, things like that. And then the file data goes out to a separate part of the disk. So as you're enumerating the contents of that volume, that's basically just a straight read of the file system metadata. You can think about the hard drive actuator on that old rotational disk. It doesn't have to move very much to get the data from that clumped area of the hard drive. With APFS, Apple didn't do that sort of optimization. They optimized APFS for SSDs. And with SSDs, there's no seek penalty for getting data from random parts of the disk. So with APFS, the file system metadata is scattered all over the disk, which is fine for an SSD, but on an HDD, on a rotational disk, that hard drive actuator is just bouncing all over the place. And you can hear that chatter. It's really loud and crazy, but the performance is just horrible.
Well, I was going to say that would explain something to me, Mike, which the listeners have heard me possibly mention, which is I'm running my MacBook Pro on the Catalina beta, but to record the show, because Paul Kafasis's Rogue Amoeba apps, he doesn't issue betas for the beta period. He works on making sure that they'll work correctly when a new system goes live.
Sure.
So obviously, without those apps, I can't record the podcast. So to record the podcast, I actually have to boot my MacBook Pro from my carbon copy clone of the Mojave install, which is on a rotational drive. And the performance on that drive is, it's horrible. When you're in an app, once I get everything up and running, it's fine. But the actual launch speeds, to boot the machine, I can literally go away and make a cup of tea while it loads all the apps. And I've been putting that down to some extent to the fact that obviously it's a rotational drive and it's running on USB. Mm-hmm. But even then, I thought that's awfully slow, even for that. So yeah, that explains a lot to me, because obviously what you're saying is that the way that the Mojave data is cloned onto that drive is optimized not optimized. It's not optimized because it doesn't matter on an SSD. But
right.
So so that would explain why the performance from my USB drive, whilst is bearable as long as you're not trying to do anything in a hurry, is by any other standard appalling.
Yeah, and it really ate at me. Initially, I was the same way. It's like, well, it's a rotational disk and yada yada. They're always slower than SSDs. I felt we're just spoiled with SSDs. But man, I started doing some testing, and it really itched at me. It was just not nearly as good as I expected it to be, even for a rotational disk. And that's when I started digging into it, and I figured out that it's all the transactional stuff that is just not as optimized for APFS on rotational disks. And if you think about it, when you're booting the system is seeking and statting just thousands of files. So there's a lot of transactional stuff that occurs in the boot process. And if APFS is not optimized at least a little bit for rotational disks, it's just never going to perform well on them. And I mean, we're 3 operating system versions out, and there's still no indication that Apple's going to do that. Throw a bone to the HDD users. So I kind of feel like it's either just not going to happen, or maybe on Tuesday we're going to find out that it's all new Macs and only SSDs and rotational disks. We should just stick it under the back tire of the truck and run over it. Oh.
Well, nice as it would be, I'm sure, for most of us to have external SSDs merely to maintain, our safety net CCC clone. I have to say, that you can still go and buy a pretty big rotational drive for a fraction of what you would pay for an SSD, even though, I'll be fair, SSD, prices are plummeting as we speak.
Yeah, I'd love to see Apple come out with their own SSD that beats the price off of everyone else.
Yeah.
That would be a great announcement on Tuesday.
Yeah, and one more thing. The cheapest SSDs on the market. Oh, yeah. Yeah, I think a lot of people would be flying flags at top mast if that was to happen. Somehow, Apple and their margins, I don't think that's likely to happen. No. So, coming back to that slightly, obviously, the other thing you told me, I think, in an email was that Catalina requires even the backups to be on an APFS volume.
APFS.
Is that right?
Correct,
because I know the last time you came on the show, we were talking about Mojave, I think, and we were talking about how Carbon Copy Cloner could clone an APFS volume onto an HFS volume and back again, kind of on the fly, without you having to worry about, because at that time, if I recall, Apple was saying you shouldn't use APFS on a rotational drive. Now, looking at the performance of an APFS formatted rotational drive, maybe that was why, but...
Yeah, Apple, it's kind of funny. They've been really... You can't nail them down on a recommendation. It was kind of weird, but I mean, we tried to eke out APFS on the backup for as long as possible, primarily because the performance was better and because we could do it. As far as retaining your backup, the fidelity of the backup, that's fine. HFS, APFS didn't matter. And even now for user data, for the most part, HFS is still perfectly fine for backup purposes. But for the operating system in Catalina just refuses to use HFS as a startup disk, and that's because of the volume group structure. Catalina requires that read-only system volume, and it requires a volume group that has the read-write data volume, and we just can't replicate that in HFS. So it's just a non-starter.
Okay, so from carbon copy cloner's point of view, if you were to say, I want to clone my drive, but I don't need to make it bootable, would that mean you could still use an HFS volume?
Yeah, so if you wanted to back up just your users folder, for example, we're not going to impose the APFS requirement on that sort of backup. So if you were to just drag your users folder onto the source selector, you can back that up to anything. That would be fine. It's specifically when you choose a Catalina system volume as the source, that's when we're going to say, all right, this looks like a bootable backup, and we're going to go down that avenue and make sure that the destination can support it. But if you wanted to back up a single folder or a non-system volume, then that you could still back up to an HFS volume.
Okay, right. Well, that's handy to know. I mean, for me, I'll be honest, the only kind of clones that I make using Carbon Copy Cloner are bootable clones of my system, because obviously from a laptop you've basically only got one volume in there, so that's if that's my backup, and it is very much my fallback, if something goes horribly wrong, even if the performance from a USB rotational drive is diabolical, it's better than nothing. Which is exactly for me, the main point of having a clone. It's like, if something all goes horribly wrong, if my laptop bursts into flames, I can take my clone and I can stick it into another machine and I can get up and running. So
and it's different for some people versus others. For some people, that's exactly what they need, is just in case I would have this, and if it takes 10 minutes to boot, I still have a working system, and I would be able to live with it. But there are some people who are like, producers or whatever, and they absolutely have to have a system that would be functional. Those are the guys that are going to have the 2 terabyte SSD, and they're going to have flawless performance from the backup. It just depends on what you need from your backup.
Well, yeah, exactly. And I would say, if I my laptop is my it's my personal machine, and so I have my Carbon Copy clone as a backup, or at the moment, so that I can boot back into Catalina, but it's not mission critical. So yeah, I can live for the period of time that I need to do that with that performance, and I will when I'm able to run purely in Catalina, then I shall make a clone of Catalina. And but yeah, like at work, if that was a mission critical situation for me, where if something went horribly wrong, I needed to be up and going, and I couldn't put up with terrible performance. Of course, then I would most definitely go out and buy myself a 500 or 1 terabyte SSD, because then the clone would be almost as fast, as the internal drive.
Yes.
From my point of view, my Carbon Copy clone backup is exactly that. It's a recovery position. If everything goes horribly wrong, if my laptop imploded, when I got a new laptop, I could plug it in and be back where I started and clone it back again. But in a work situation, obviously, I could not at work be in a situation where I was running off a drive that was making the machine run at a quarter speed. That would just not be viable. So in that situation, I would obviously be investing in an SSD. And like you say, if you're a producer or a videographer or something, but then again, it becomes a return on investment business expense, doesn't it?
Right. Precisely.
It's not. I always say it's all different when you're making money out of it, as opposed to, if that's what you're doing to make a living, then it doesn't matter if you have to invest, I don't know, let's call it $1,000 for a backup solution. If that keeps you working when something goes wrong, that's $1,000 well invested. For somebody at home, like me, $1,000 would be an awful lot of money to spend on something that I hopefully am never really going to need.
Right.
But how much of a challenge was it for you Mike, really, to how much re-engineering did you have to do to CCC?
Yeah, this was the single largest change that Apple's made to how the system boots since we started doing this 17 years ago. As far as re-engineering, though, I mean, not to pat myself on the back, but the infrastructure that we had within CCC already was really easy to adapt to this. So it wasn't a huge technical challenge, but it was tedious. It was an incredible amount of logic because a lot of the stuff that we're doing once, now we're doing twice. So now we've got 2 volumes to deal with. And the other thing is that we support 5 operating systems with CCC, which is something that we're probably going to have to stop in the near future if Apple keeps throwing changes like this every OS. But with 5 operating systems, some having HFS startup disks, some having APFS startup disks, some having APFS volume group startup disks, there's a lot of logic and scenarios that we have to step through to make sure that we're going in the right direction. So from that perspective, it was a lot of tedious work. But for the most part, we had a proof of concept done at the end of the week that Apple announced it in WWDC, and then I think by mid-July, I had a beta out.
I was going to say, I know that you had a beta out really, really quickly because I think I was probably on Catalina Public Beta 2 when my CCC said, Mike's released a beta that at least partly works with Catalina. Would you like to install that? Yes, please. Yes, please. I think I might be wrong here, but I think did your first beta say not guaranteed for startup drives or something? I know you had a beta out really quickly, and I think the first one said on it, don't trust this for a bootable clone. I think.
Yeah. So actually, the first beta we put out in May, and I can't remember if I posted another beta after that, but I mean, when we realized how much work it was going to be, I put out a beta that basically said, don't expect this to, or maybe I just put it in the release notes. I said, this isn't going to work, this isn't going to work, this isn't going to work. It's all this changes. It was when Apple released beta 4 that I put out my first beta that worked with Catalina. And it's always so rocky. It's tough working within the beta period because, not only are we changing a lot of stuff, but even beta to beta from Catalina, a lot of stuff is changing. And Catalina beta 4, both beta 3 and beta 4, introduced such mind-blowing, huge changes in the system. I couldn't even believe it. So, beta 4 came out, and I had literally just posted our beta, and then I started doing some testing on beta 4, and I was like, oh, well, this doesn't work now, and that doesn't work the same way anymore.
Back to the drawing board.
Yeah. But we did finally post CCC 5.1.10 and 11 a couple weeks ago, and it's feeling pretty stable. Catalina is feeling pretty stable at this point. So barring any major changes, we're calling this qualified for Catalina. And I've got some documentation, some videos that we've been working on. And actually early next week, we're putting our documentation out for translation. So unless Apple drops Catalina on Tuesday, which I don't think they're going to do, we're going to have one more bump in CCC and then all localized documentation 100% ready for Catalina so that before people start downloading it, they can start learning about it and getting their Mojave backups in place and hit the ground running. I think on the whole, it'll be pretty smooth. There's been some things with iCloud that have been panic inducing. I lost everything that I had in iCloud, which thankfully I don't keep anything important in there, but it was quite a shock during the beta testing that all that stuff disappeared.
I must admit that
it'll be smooth.
Yeah, I mean, I've been on the Catalina betas. Everybody who listens to this show know that I tend to live out on the bleeding edge, and the minute there's a beta, I'm on it. And yeah, the iCloud has been a little bit. I have to say, I've not suffered any. The whole thing that you've just mentioned there. Lots of people were saying, somehow iCloud managed to delete everything. I've not had any of that. I did suffer in the early betas, the fact that every time you change something, it would duplicate your folders, so but document folders. The document folders were multiplying like rabbits. You'd go in
I
there
have
and
like
then
120 of them.
wow, no, I think mine. I went in there one time. I thought, why is my iCloud complaining that it's out of space? There's nothing of any consequence in there. Yeah, well, there's nothing of any consequence in there 15 times as it had gone, documents 1, documents 2, documents 3. I don't know, that carried on for quite a while. I can't remember how many betas in it was before that. Also, as I understand it, Apple have now pulled some of the putative iCloud features for Catalina, at least for now. They've pulled back from the shared folders, I believe, and can't remember what other feature they were touting, but that's been held back. It won't be in Catalina, 0.0.
Yeah, that's one thing about Apple. They never move their deadline. They'll pull features, but they never move their deadline, which is actually kind of nice from a developer perspective. I tell you, the last 4 years where we've had these very consistent, WWDC is the first week of June, and Apple releases the major OS in late September. That has been just a dream to work with, that kind of consistency. It's really nice.
Yep, that is, and I, as a consumer, and it's also quite nice to know. I think that if you can start to prepare when the betas come out, that the betas are going to run for whatever it is, 3 months, and then it will go live. And if some features don't seem ready for prime time, what they do is hold those back or just chuck them all together. But yes, you're right. They don't. I don't know what you think about this, and I don't normally try to get into speculation. But are you of the similar mind to me that this September event will be almost certainly iOS focused, and that it's quite likely that there will be a later October event, maybe more focused around Catalina and possibly some Mac hardware?
What's funny is I don't pay attention to any of those at all.
Don't you? There you go. Why not? I'm sure. Yeah, you've probably got plenty of other things to worry about. Yeah.
Yeah. My big event is early June, and I am glued to it. And then it's just a matter of making sure we stay on top of whatever happens in September, and then I just read the news as it comes.
And then, I was going to say, so I can imagine actually from June to September is heads down, keep working, boys, keep going. Once you get over the line in September, then you can worry about all the rest of it.
Yeah.
Then you start about November. You probably start planning for next June.
Yeah, November is about Thanksgiving for us in the States. I think that's a perfect time to apply the new OS. I like to give it a couple releases to let the plebeians and the masses.
Well, you mean let the loons like me loose on it?
Yeah, because there's probably 1 million or more people in the beta period, but even as you go from that last beta and then you put it out to just hundreds of millions of people, you really find all of the edge cases. And it happens every single time, even in my own software. You do lots of beta testing, you're like, all right, I found all of them, all bugs, I got them squashed, and then you put it out, and then it's like, orders of magnitude more people are using it. It's like, oh, well, we didn't see that scenario. And so by November, all that stuff is hammered out.
Excellent. Yeah. So, so there you go. There you go, listeners. That's Mike's official recommendation. Wait until Thanksgiving or late November to jump to Catalina. Or if you're a crazy loon like me who's been on the beta since they let it out, I shall be installing it, no doubt, the second it goes live. But so there you go. Well, I'll tell you what, Mike. I'm still not feeling that great. So I think what we'll do, if it's all right with you, I think we'll just take a quick look at a few stories. Thank you for that, in-depth, discussion. But if we just have a quick glance at a few short stories, and then I'll let you go, to be honest. News-wise, not much news, as I said. This one is a weird one here. The US has ordered Apple and Google as well, by the way, to identify users of a rifle scope app. Also, I've got another one there. Defense Department wants Apple, Google to reveal names of gun scope app users. Basically, the US government is saying that this Scope app, I think it's called Obsidian, is used to help rifle users calibrate their telescopic sight. And the government are claiming that somebody has been illegally exporting said scope, and they're asking Google and Apple to give up the names and IP addresses of everybody who has downloaded this calibration app, so they can see if they're abroad. Seems a bit of overreach to me, and I'm pretty sure both Google and Apple are likely to tell them to take a long walk. But that was a somewhat strange story. Just caught my eye, that one, really. Just another one of those talking about edge cases, I suppose. The US are saying if you give us all these, all the downloads, we can find out which people are overseas. Not sure.
Yeah, I saw that pop up and I was looking forward to reading it. That article.
Yeah, I have read it. It's neither of them particularly in depth, but they're both worth a glance. And I think both of them come to the conclusion that it's highly likely that Google and Apple will tell the authorities that they're trying to overstep the mark. Last week we talked about the Google 0 Day group published a piece about what a fairly serious breach of iOS, which was very complicated, involved long chains of vulnerabilities, and it was quite weird in that it was being said that it was based around some websites with thousands of visitors per week. It would appear that this was almost certainly at the behest of the Chinese government, and seems to have been targeting the Uyghur Muslim Chinese population, which is not very pleasant, I have to say. Apple allegedly are angry at Google and saying that they have misrepresented the situation. Other people are saying that Apple have, perhaps made a bit of a PR faux pas because they're coming across as somewhat cloth-eared, pointing out, shall we say, technical, what should I call it? Inconsistencies in Google's comments, whereas a lot of other people are more worried about the fact that the Chinese government appear to be attempting to spy on a minority population. I'm not sure about that. I read both sides of that argument. I can understand why Apple are trying to point out what they believe are incorrect statements by Google, but I also do think that they have come across as being more concerned about petty technicalities than the fact that the Chinese government were exploiting flaws, some complicated flaws nonetheless, in iOS to spy on a portion of their own population. I find that one difficult to come down on one side or the other. Apple say, very much that they want to protect the rights of everybody, but they often do seem a little bit lighter on the Chinese government than perhaps they deserve. Don't really want to get into politics there, but again, I think Apple are in a very difficult situation. They need the Chinese market, so they can't afford to hack off the Chinese government too much. But at the same time, of course, they don't want to upset, shall we say, the more libertarian section of their market anywhere else. There we go. I don't know if you know anything about this one, Mike. It says private messaging apps scrambling to overhaul software following Apple's privacy changes. The reason I wondered if you might know more about this is obviously, you have access to developer news and so on. Apparently this is something to do with changes to the push.
Oh, on the iOS side?
Yeah.
I'm not familiar with anything on the iOS side.
Okay.
There's certainly there's some privacy changes in Catalina on the privacy side that it's starting to get frustrating as an end user to use the system, but on iOS I don't dabble in that very much.
Okay, well that's fair enough. What's he say in there? iOS 13 introduced a change limiting data collection practices using voice over IP API, which has consequences for messaging apps such as Facebook Messenger, WhatsApp, etc. The makers of encrypted messaging apps such as Signal, Wicker, Threema, and Wire are scrambling to overhaul their software to protect key privacy features they believe may be compromised. What Apple is doing is limiting the PushKit API, designed to be used for voice over IP calls, but over time has been used for purposes such as collecting data or, in the case of messaging apps, encryption. Interesting. Apparently, encrypted messaging apps use the voice over IP APIs for decrypting messages on the iPhone in the background, and this will be disabled. Right, okay, that's interesting.
Almost sounds like they're going to have to come up with their own encryption if they want to send.
I don't think it's actually being used. I don't think it's being used for encryption per se. I think they're somehow using it as a background process to decrypt the messages on the fly. As reading between the lines, I have to say, because I'm no expert on such things. Just for what it's worth, I'm on the Wire beta for iOS 13 beta. I've had no issues with that, and I've seen nothing in their notes about that, so I don't. Then again, it's Mac rumours. It's the term scrambling may be hyperbolic. I'm not quite sure. I'm not going to go so far as to say that needs a clickbait alert, but let's just say I shall. That's something I shall look into. I shall look into that. What else have we got? Apparently, if your iPad Pro is suffering from backlight bleeding, if you suffer from backlight bleeding, Apple may replace your iPad Pro for free. Apparently, there we go. So they should. I should think, if there's something wrong with it. Apparently, backlight bleeding occurs where the seal between the backlight and the LCD doesn't work correctly, allowing light to leak through, causing, unsurprisingly, light spots and blotches, particularly under low light. So there you are. And the other one is, of course, Apple appears to be, rumours say that Apple are going to launch a tracking tile, AirTag. I've seen somebody, nickname it, which allegedly is going to be more capable than tile. Might be interesting, but then again, if Apple are anything to go by, they'll cost like $100 each. They'll be absolutely wonderful, but they'll cost, I could probably buy 10 nut tile trackers for the same price. There we are. It's a rumour with apparently enough clout that Tile have been sending goodie bags to journalists, and also apparently working with Google. Apparently, Google Assistant is going to be able to help you find your tile. So it's, Tile are not going to take that one lying down, I think. There we are. And I'll be honest, I think that's pretty much it, Mike. We have here IDC say the worldwide server market revenue declined 11.6% year over year. Struck me as a strange thing, because we're told, aren't we, as everything is moving to the cloud, that the server market is doing well, but IDC say that revenues have declined. I don't know if that means competition is meaning that manufacturers are having to cut their margins in order to try and maintain share, but there we are. That was an unusual statistic, I thought. And that's pretty much it. I've got a worth of chirp from a Mac Jim. He says, if you're a train user in the UK, he has found a free non-subscription app called By Train, UK Train Times from Alexander McLeod, which you can find in the App Store. There we are. And just a snippet, there's a link here. A Redditor has turned his broken MacBook Pro into a kind of one of these hybrid detachable iPad type devices by removing the screen from his broken MacBook and fitting his iPad and using Sidecar and some other pieces of Apple software technology to build himself a hybrid iPad laptop. There we go. That was an interesting little read. Yeah,
it's very interesting.
It was very clever. It's very clever. I think most of us would probably think it's far too much effort to go into, but it was it's like these people who do modding. You look at the end results and go, wow, that's fantastic. And then find out that they've spent 2 years and, $10,000 to do it.
It reminds me of the camera phone from Flight of the Conchords, where the guys taped a camera to a phone.
But yeah, there you go. Nice piece of work from him. A clever way to keep his MacBook Pro working and still retain his iPad Pro as a usable, detachable device. And that's about it. So thank you very much for coming on, Mike. This is the bit usually where I ask you to tout yourself, where people can find you, or read your blog, promote your soon to be released latest version of CCC and all that. So over to you.
Yeah, sure. So I encourage everyone to go to bombich.com or carboncopycloner.com and check out our latest version of CCC, which is now qualified for macOS Catalina. And you can also find a lot of information about what you can expect from macOS Catalina and how our new product works with macOS Catalina. Again, that's bombich.com. And like I said, I'll be posting a new blog post next week that talks about APFS performance on rotational disks. So if you're looking for some light reading for going to bed, head on over to our blog.
And for anybody who's interested in the APS volume groups and how that all works, I've got a link I will put in the show notes to Mike's very helpful piece, which kind of explains the basics of APS volume groups. I've read it. He sent it to me when I first asked him about that. I don't know, back when the first beta came out, I think. It's very helpful. I've published it in the Slack before, but it's worth a look if you haven't looked it up. And as I say, that's about it. You can follow me on Twitter as @Serenak, and that's SERENAK. The show is at Essential Apple, although I don't use that anywhere near as much as I should. You can find all of our stuff over at essentialapple.com, and I think what we'll do is we'll go over to John Nemo, and Mike and I will call it a show. So thanks for listening, everybody. Back next week with Ashley Hewson from Serif, and Mike and I will say goodbye. So goodbye.
Goodbye.
Nemo's hardware store has become very fond of portable mini docks or micro hubs featuring USB-C connectivity to the new Apple laptops with lots of ports. We have 2 of them that we're recommending today. First one is called USB-C Travel Dock with Power Delivery 3.0. Company is IOGear, IOGEAR.com, and Simon will have the links and the prices for US, UK, and elsewhere in our show notes for this episode. This is a small dock, a micro dock, micro hub, fits in my hand. Got an Ethernet port at one end. It's oblong, about 2 inches by 4 inches, more or less, by about a half an inch thick. At the other end is a permanently affixed cable. It's about 6 inches long, USB-C tip. And then along one side, you've got 2 USB 3 blue ports, and then a micro SD card and an SD card slot. On the other side, you have a USB-C power pass-through slot, and then one more USB 3 port and the HDMI. This is what we use in my workshops, because people come to my workshops and my classes. They don't bring any adapter. We need to project their computer onto one of my screens. The screens are HDMI, and we connect one of these micro hubs or mini docks to their computer. Then the HDMI cable goes into the appropriate port, and bingo, we are on HDMI projection. It works great. This one from IOGear, the list price is $100 in the US. I've seen it in American pricing for down to about $65. So you will definitely be able to find this at a good price. Even at $100, it's worth it, because as they say, it's perfect companion for traveling professionals. 3-year warranty. IOGear is a very good company. I've been working with them since 2001. So that's a long time. Big fan of IOGear. 4K resolution, video output. You can charge your laptops and devices with 100-watt power delivery. Read about it on the website that we link to at essentialapple.com. That's the USB-C travel dock with power delivery 3.0 from IOGear.com, $65 to $100 in the US. A similar product is called the Staygo, S-T-A-Y-G-O, one word, USB-C hub company is called 12 South, TWELVESOUTH, 12south.com. Again, look at the website. You can see the videos and the links and the information on how to use this product. This costs $100 in the U.S. I haven't seen it on special anywhere. Again, it's worth the full price because it does something that none of the other mini hubs and micro docks do. It's a little bit more substantial. It's a full 2 inches by 5 or so inches, again, a half an inch across. It's about a third bigger than the one from IoGear. It has similar configuration, 1 HDMI, 3 USB 3, Ethernet, USB-C pass-through, SD card, and micro SD. Basically identical configuration, but the difference is in how you connect it. It comes with 2 cables. One is conveniently tucked into the chassis. Very clever. You don't see it at first. So it pulls out and you can connect it to your computer just like the other one and all the similar products do. But it also has a much longer cable. This is about a 3-foot cable with USB-C tip at the end. Because there's times you don't want it to be tethered to your MacBook Pro quite at such close range. You need a little bit of distance. The slim, compact design of Stego means it takes up little room in your computer bag or backpack. That's exactly right. Ethernet and SD card slots for creative professionals, and I can recommend both of these. Don't worry about the difference between $65 or $75 and $100 or whatever the price is in your country. Get the one that looks and feels right for you. They'll both do the job, but for a tiny bit more money, it's a bit more substantial, a bit more rugged, the Stego, and it does have the much, much longer cable in addition to the shorty cable. They've really set themselves apart. It's the only micro hub or mini dock we've seen for USB-C that is fully featured that has not 1 but 2 cable options. Well, this is the first of lots of coverage of new gear that's coming into Nemo's hardware store. So keep listening, keep following our links, and we'll have more good stuff for you every week.
You've been listening to the Essential Apple podcast, and I'd like to say if you enjoy the show and would like to support us, feel free to go over to the website essentialapple.com and you will find links to both Patreon and the Pinecast Tips Jar, where you can make a donation towards the costs of the show, or even if you're really keen, you could set up a recurring payment. And thank you very, very much to all the people who already do support us. We really do appreciate you very much indeed. This show is, of course, part of the My Mac Podcasting Network, where you can find a variety of other shows like the My Mac Podcast with Guy and Gaz, the G-Men, Tech Fan with Tim and David, the Nintendo Club podcast, the geekiest show ever, the 3 Geeky Ladies, Bart Bouchot's and his wonderful Let's Talk Apple, and possibly some more that I've forgotten. So why not go over to mymac.com, take a look at the available podcasts, and take a listen.
Hello, I'm Guy.
And I'm Gaz from the mymac.com podcast. And we're here to tell you about a very serious condition plaguing Mac users everywhere.
It's known as BPSI, or Boring Podcast Sleep Induction. It can happen anytime, anywhere, while listening to dull podcasts and driving.
You can prevent BPSI by subscribing to the mymac.com podcast on iTunes. Our podcast is many things, but never boring.
Available without a doctor's prescription. The MyMac.com podcast is not responsible for loss of bodily functions while laughing. Side effects include blurred vision, nervous tics trying not to smile, angry yelling when we say something wrong, and the inability to call our Skype number, which is 703-436-9501. Women trying to become pregnant should not be listening to the MyMac.com podcast, as it will take time away from having sex, which you normally need to do to become pregnant.
So remember, listen to the mymac.com podcast. Think of the children.
You have been listening to the Essential Apple podcast. Thank you for listening, and we hope to see you next time.